What can be said that hasn't already been said about The Matrix? A film that revolutionized action movies for a whole decade. The film that restored Keanu Reeves' career and made him into the action star we know today. And a film that took two relatively unknown American directors and made them into household names. The Matrix was a cultural landmark in 1999, going on to gross $460 million worldwide and spawning two highly anticipated sequels. However, these sequels were met with confusion and anger from fans, halting the production of more Matrix movies for the foreseeable future. In 2021, Warner Bros. Released the fourth Matrix movie, The Matrix Resurrections, the first Matrix movie since 2003. The Matrix Resurrections, helmed by Lana Wachowski without her sister Lily, was met with pretty divisive opinions, some heralding the film as a subversive masterpiece, while others calling the film a bastardization of what a Matrix movie should be. I want to take a deeper look at The Matrix Resurrections, a blockbuster by a trans filmmaker, and present the film through a queer theory lens. Let's see how deep the rabbit hole goes. A brief history of The Matrix. For some quick background, The Matrix follows Thomas Anderson, a programmer by day and a hacker by night who goes by the name Neo. Neo is contacted by the mysterious Morpheus, who reveals to him that the world he lives in is the Matrix, a simulated reality created by machines for the express purpose of using human beings as batteries. The humans that have been able to free their mind from the Matrix live in a city called Zion, where they're in constant threat of being destroyed by the machines. Morpheus tells Neo that he is the one, the person who will end the war between humans and machines. Neo is given the choice to free his mind from the Matrix with the red pill, or conform to his reality with the blue pill. Neo chooses the red pill, and his journey begins. Neo joins a resistance of fellow humans, starts a romance with fellow hacker Trinity, and takes on the villainous Agent Smith, a program inside the Matrix that works to keep the humans in line. At the end of the trilogy, Trinity and Neo travel to the Machine City to make a deal for peace. Trinity is killed when their ship crashes, and Neo sacrifices himself to destroy Agent Smith, who is now a threat to the machines, in exchange for the end of the war. An introduction to queer theory. Before we analyze The Matrix Resurrections through a queer theory lens, we should go over the basics of what queer theory is. In this context, the word queer isn't simply a synonym for LGBT, it's a method of political action. To queer something is to challenge the status quo and the structural norms in our society. For an example, our whole society is built around the norm that there are men and women and no other option. A queer theorist would see that norm and dismantle it by acknowledging the social construction of gender and the harmful binary that having two diametrically opposed genders can have. As outlined by Kathy Rudy in her piece Queer Theory and Feminism, there are four main assertions that guide queer theory. The first assertion is the recognition of the role of interpretation in understanding all aspects of human life. Queer theorists assert that all we know isn't without room for analysis. Our relationships, events, and attitudes are not set in stone. Our past is full of abnormalities and glitches that we've glossed over in an effort to make things normal. For an example, the first collection of poems by poet Emily Dickinson were published posthumously in 1890. In 1998, a New York Times article revealed that the name Susan was deliberately removed from much of Dickinson's work. This Susan most likely refers to Susan Gilbert, Dickinson's childhood friend, who married Dickinson's brother and lived close to Dickinson her whole adult life. When poems and letters were found after Dickinson's death, names were crossed out with ink and knives lifted up words from the page, a pretty deliberate attempt to erase a same-sex romance from history. Queer theory wants us to take a look back at the past with an eye towards disruption, to challenge what has been considered normal for so long. There was no way that Emily Dickinson and Susan Gilbert could make their romance public due to the societal norms of the time, but that doesn't mean that they were not in love. What is told and passed down and what is real is one thing that queer theory aims to bring to light. The second assertion is that gender and sexual identities are socially constructed categories that have changed over time. The two categories of heterosexual and homosexual are relatively new, and what we might categorize as a gay relationship now wasn't always the case back then. For an example, in George Chauncey's study of the construction of sexuality in 19th century New York City, he identifies a third gender that came about in the 1880s, that of the fairy. Fairies were effeminate men who dressed as women and had sex with masculine men. During that time, masculine men would choose to have sex with both women and fairies, not deciding who to have sex with by if the person had a penis or a vagina, but if they were taking a passive role in the intercourse. What we know presently as heterosexuality and homosexuality, male and female, are categories created due to long-standing political and societal consequences, and not a definitive way of being. These categories wrongly assert that someone's gender identification is obvious to everyone, and that having a penis or a vagina is the sole determinator if someone acts as a masculine man or as a feminine woman. Furthermore, queer theorists assert that there is no definitive test for gender that can be performed that on a foolproof level determines if someone is male or female. Thus, these two categories are not constructed by biological fact, but are socially constructed by our society. When we're born, we're divided into one or two categories and taught how to act accordingly with that gender. We learn gender performance, how we dress, what we do, and what we say to keep in line with our assigned category of male or female. Thus, gender isn't who we are, but what we do. When it comes to putting these ideas into practice, queer theorists want us to move on from labels. Due to the exclusionary nature of categorizing gender and sexuality, queer theorists believe that coalitions should be formed around progressive politics, not specific identities. For queer theorists, what they're fighting for is more important than who they're fighting with. The third assertion of queer theory is the belief that their progressive policies will not be accepted by those in positions of power. Thus, queer theorists use an aggressive, in-your-face approach in their activism. For an example, Queer Nation Los Angeles protested the 64th Academy Awards for their treatment of LGBT characters in the nominated films and their ambivalence towards the AIDS crisis. Films like JFK feature a gay lawyer played by Tommy Lee Jones, who was a conspirator in JFK's assassination. The Silence of the Lambs featured a trans serial killer, and Basic Instinct had a bisexual, man-hating murderess. The Queer Nation protesters with signs and banners parked right outside the red carpet. Many protesters were arrested for joining arms in the middle of the street and blocking the limousines from pulling up to the building, forcing celebrities to walk on foot by them. The protest made an obvious impact on the Oscars crowd, with some celebrities standing in solidarity with Queer Nation. Whoopi Goldberg said of the protests that it's important to let people know that we have a responsibility to make films in the correct fashion. Also noteworthy was many presenters of the event wore AIDS pins. Billy Crystal, the host of the event, even explained to the people watching at home what the pin meant. In short, queer activism isn't concerned with playing nice and is designed to make straight people uncomfortable by illustrating to them just how complicit in the perceived normalcy of the society they operate in. Many queer protesters will kiss in public, cross-dress, and wear tight leather clothing, hallmarks of uninhibited sexuality, to call attention to themselves and their rejection of the norm. In a lot of ways, there's no better place for queer activists to make a statement than at a prim and proper student-high event like the Academy Awards. The fourth and final assertion of queer theory is the belief in sex positivity. Queer theorists believe that all consensual sex is good sex, and work to destigmatize forms of sex such as BDSM, group sex, leather bars, and cross-dressing. Queer theory asserts that sex shouldn't be put in categories of normal and abnormal, and instead people should embrace sex that makes them feel good. Sex doesn't have to be about procreation or even intimacy. It can just be liberating and fun. Queer theorists believe that people should embrace new ways of exploring sexuality and challenge the narratives in our society that tells us what forms of sex are normal and therefore acceptable. Now that you have a pretty good idea what the tenets of queer theory are, let's dive into the Matrix Resurrections and explore how each of these aspects of queer theory can be analyzed throughout this film. Intro to the Matrix Resurrection. The Matrix Resurrections follows Thomas Anderson, a video game developer of the popular game series, The Matrix. Thomas deals with the intrusive thoughts of his life as Neo, the protagonist of his games, and goes to his analyst for medication to stop these delusions. Thomas is approached by Bugs in a programmed version of Morpheus, who tells him that he's actually Neo, taken back into a new Matrix by the machines. Neo finds out later that he and Trinity were resurrected by the analyst, who is using their connection as batteries to power a new Matrix. Neo is able to escape the new Matrix and returns with Bugs and Morpheus to Io, a new form of Zion where machines and humans coexist. Neo decides to travel back into the Matrix to save Trinity, who is still unaware of her past. After a plea from Neo, Trinity is able to break the hold the Matrix has on her mind and escape. At the end of the film, Neo and Trinity have full control over the Matrix and decide to use it to make the simulation a better place for the minds still in it. Glitches in the Matrix. One of the main concepts in the Matrix is deja vu, which happens when the Matrix is changing something. Neo experiences deja vu in the first movie when he sees a cat move past a doorway twice, signaling to the members of the Resistance that the machines know where they are and have made changes to the Matrix to deal with them. This concept of deja vu comes back in the Matrix Resurrections through the analyst cat, aptly named Deja Vu. Neo sees the cat Deja Vu when he unsuccessfully attempts to escape the Matrix during a shootout between Morpheus and a new form of Agent Smith, and finds himself suddenly back at the analyst's office like nothing ever happened. The analyst tells Neo that the violence he witnessed was not real and only a delusion of his mind. The analyst works tirelessly throughout the movie to control Neo, make him doubt what he sees, and prevent him from deciphering the artificial nature of his reality. Like how in the first assertion of queer theory our past is filled with glitches and abnormalities that have been smoothed over to seem normal, Neo's visions of his life outside the Matrix are sedated by the analyst through use of blue pills, keeping him from rediscovering his identity outside the rigid confines of the Matrix. Like deja vu, which changes the past, those in positions of power in our society work to keep everyone believing that the status quo is just, natural, and unchanging. To uphold this normalcy, gay figures throughout history are made straight, freedom fighters are rebranded as radicalists, and slave owners are viewed as complicated men. Queer theorists work towards disrupting what's considered normal in society and call attention to these glitches throughout our history. By breaking out of the Matrix and embracing his true identity, Neo is directly challenging the rules of a system that literally function off of his conformity, breaking the binary. One of the most famous parts of the original Matrix is the red pill, blue pill choice, to either have your mind freed from the Matrix and confront the harsh reality that what you know about the world is a lie, or wake up in your bed ignorant to the system that controls your life. What we have here is a pretty cut and dry binary choice: wake up or stay asleep. In the opening scene of Matrix Resurrections, Bugs offers Morpheus the same red pill, blue pill choice, but this time it's a bit different. Bugs calls attention to the lack of choice in this scenario because people in our society have already made up their minds if they want to challenge the norms or conform to them. In this scene, Matrix Resurrections establishes one of its main themes, that of the rejection of the binary and of our socially constructed categories. Later in the film, Neo visits Io, a city created after the old city of Zion fell. Niobe, who is the leader of Io, explains to Neo that they created the new city with help from rogue machines who defected from their leaders. All throughout the Matrix movies, the machines have been the main threat, an inhuman antagonist to our human protagonists. However, Io has peace, which is something Zion could have never had. Niobe says that Zion was stuck in a matrix of their own, believing that it had to be us versus them, and Io was built by us and them. Zion failed because of its dedication to binary thinking, a black and white view of the world that was inherently harmful and restrictive. Like queer theorists who reject socially constructed categories as sex and gender that are limiting and binary, those in Io directly challenged the status quo by collaborating with machines and were able to shape a more peaceful world because of it. Another way the Matrix Resurrections challenges the binary is at the end of the movie. The Matrix has always been viewed as an oppressive force that keeps people from the real world, that the fake reality is inherently harmful because it isn't real. At the end of the film, both Neo and Trinity have control over the Matrix and decide to remake the system rather than destroy it. They decide to let people who want to escape the Matrix do so, but for those who want to stay, they'll paint the sky with rainbows. The Matrix doesn't have to be a bad, scary place that's miserable for people to live in. It can be beautiful and liberating if the right people have a say. Queer activists want to tear down the binaries in our society and create a world where people are free to live their life outside of oppressive structures and systems. Living under social systems isn't inherently a bad thing, but it's due to the restrictive nature of the binary and the oppressive nature of our patriarchal society on people's identities that people suffer. Therefore, challenging these systems to remake them to be more inclusive and celebratory of human life is the goal of queer theorists. Binary thinking that relies solely on what we've been taught by our society stands in the way of peace and progress. Zion failed because they couldn't move beyond the binary, and Neo and Trinity will succeed because they're willing to embrace the grays of a black and white choice, making the system that allows for people to prosper within and outside of the Matrix. Finally, The Matrix Resurrections commentates on the socially constructed nature of gender and sexuality that our society perpetuates. In a scene early on in the film, Neo as Thomas Anderson talks to Trinity, known inside the Matrix as Tiffany, at a coffee shop. Both characters are sedated by the Matrix, but suspect that something isn't right in their lives. Tiffany talks about having children and theorizes if she really wanted them or if society programs her to be a mother. This scene encapsulates the idea of gender performance, that we are taught how to be male or female when we are born. Tiffany, speculating on if she was programmed to be a mother, examines how society expects women to bear children, and that women who don't have children are seen as abnormal, with people around them telling them that they'll grow out of it. Tiffany seems uncomfortable being in this role that the Matrix created for her, and longs for an escape. She gravitates towards the Trinity character in Thomas Anderson's video game because she's strong, cool-headed, and powerful, more masculine traits are not commonly associated with women in our society. When she tells her husband, a masculine man named Chad, that she thinks Trinity looks like her, he laughs, showing that society expects women and men to conform to the traits of masculine and feminine based upon what gender they're assigned at birth. At the end of the film, Tiffany is able to break her mind out of the Matrix, reject the family that was created for her to keep her pinned down as a mother, and rejects the feminine name Tiffany that she says she hates. As Trinity, she kicks a bunch of ass and rides her motorcycle across the city, free from the socially constructed gender role that was created to trap her inside the Matrix. Like Trinity, queer theorists acknowledge the socially constructed nature of gender and sexuality in our society and embrace who they are outside of rigid labels and harmful categorization. Fighting the power. Once human minds are freed from the Matrix and can join the Resistance, they can be plugged back into the Matrix to fight the system. Once inside the Matrix, these minds can manifest something called their DSI, or digital self-image, choosing to look however they like inside the digital world of the Matrix. Rather than blend in, many in the Resistance choose to stand out. Trinity, Neo, and other Resistance members are clad in leather trench coats and sunglasses. Morpheus wears a variety of flashy suits and coats, and characters like Bugs and Lexi display unique hairstyles and hair colors. The ways that those in the Resistance dress and present themselves is diametrically opposed to what's considered the norm inside the Matrix. For an example, the agents, the main threat inside the Matrix, are a stark contrast from the Resistance, always wearing identical black suits and sunglasses. Like queer activists who call attention to themselves with how they dress and act to disrupt what's considered normal in our society, the Resistance doesn't shy away from their incongruity within the Matrix. They highlight it. These choices in attire and appearance are also tied directly to personal freedom for members of the Resistance. After being kept in an oppressive system that they don't belong in, being able to present how you like and without care is liberating. Additionally, the actions of the Resistance are destabilizing and aggressive, like queer activists. By freeing minds from the Matrix, the Resistance are loosening control the machines have on the human population. When Neo is pulled from the Matrix by the Resistance, it sends the machines into a scramble, as he is one of the main sources of energy the Matrix runs on. The machines want to convince Neo to plug himself back into the Matrix so they can resume business as usual, but the Resistance would rather Neo die than have him conform back into the system. Therefore, to deal with the threat of the Resistance, the machines use the agents to hunt them down and snuff them out like bugs in the system. Like law enforcement for queer activists, agents are tools utilized by those in positions of power to halt progress in the disruption of norms. Agents don't have any thoughts or feelings. They're programs created to uphold the rigidness of the Matrix's oppressive systems. However, despite this threat, the Resistance doesn't back down. In their every action, from freeing minds to presenting how they like, those in the Resistance are sending a direct message to those in control of the system. We're not playing by your rules. Free love in Zion. One of the most famous scenes in the Matrix movies is the Zion cave dance scene from The Matrix Reloaded. In Zion, Morpheus gives a speech to the Resistance, telling them that despite the threat of the machines for over 100 years, they are still here. He instructs them to send a message to the army by shaking the cave. What follows is a dance sequence that slowly transitions into an orgy of sweaty bodies, kissing, grinding, and grabbing one another. Sees the brown, black, and white bodies slowly melting into one another while techno music blasts throughout the cave. To have a scene this unabashedly queer in a mainstream Hollywood movie, in 2003 no less, is nothing short of a miracle. This scene encapsulates Zion's belief in sex positivity, that having consensual sex with whoever you like, no matter what they look like or how that sex is performed, is liberating and fun. Outside of the control of the Matrix, those in Zion are able to express their sexuality in ways that would be considered abnormal and deviant within the strict confines of the Matrix. Like those in Zion, queer activists are sending a message to those in positions of power through the sex they have. They believe that all consensual sex is good, and seek to challenge the narratives placed by society that dictate what forms of sex and sexuality are natural and healthy. A massive multiracial underground orgy would not be considered appropriate by society's rigid views of sex, but as long as the sex is consensual, queer activists believe it shouldn't hold any stigma. While The Matrix Resurrections doesn't contain any sex scenes, many characters have consensual queer relationships in Io. Bugs and Lexi are implied to be in a relationship, along with Niobe and Freya, who are partners. Furthermore, Neo and Trinity have often been interpreted as being in a trans relationship, due to the Matrix being confirmed by Lana and Lily Wachowski as a trans allegory. Through these relationships, The Matrix Resurrections is saying that queer love and sexualities are valid and meaningful, regardless of what society programs us to think. Conclusion. From these examples, it's pretty apparent that the Matrix movies, and especially The Matrix Resurrections, display the tenets of queer theory throughout their text. These movies teach us that our past is filled with glitches that those in power wish to cover up to uphold a state of normalcy and control. They also teach us about the restrictive nature of binaries in our society and encourage us to recognize how we each been programmed by society to fit into specific gender roles. Furthermore, they show a resistance of all different identities that work together to challenge an oppressive and rigid system of control with in-your-face outfits and activism that's impossible to ignore. Finally, they show healthy attitudes towards all forms of consensual sex and sexuality, challenging the notion of heterosexual coitus as the norm. I'm thankful that the Matrix movies exist, not only because they have an interesting story, great action, and memorable characters, but also because they have a lot to say about how we can all challenge the systems around us and create a future that cherishes and protects all identities.